So, welcome to part 2 of this episode. If you haven't listened to part 1 already, I recommend that you go back and listen to that first, as it's a good intro to this. Hope you enjoy. Thanks for listening. How do you think you train that mental toughness? Just by progressively getting harder in your workouts and pushing, or what sort of things do you look to if somebody you think needs a bit more mental resilience and toughness?
Sometimes it's just reframing their perspective. If someone has failed at anything, often they're just caught up in the moment of the feeling of inadequacy, and their ego is like, you should probably just quit instead of keeping trying, or whatever it is. But knowing, like, if you zoom out and you see all over the world, people, athletes, entrepreneurs are trying things and it's not going the way they want, and those that try again a different way or simply concentrate harder or whatever it is, and then they meet the same challenge that they just struggled with and failed. People that can do that repeatedly over and over again are going to keep progressing, and it's all about progression. So once you've mastered a certain challenge, don't stick with that same challenge, because then it's too easy for you. You're going to have to keep taking on harder and harder challenges. But that's also where the joy comes, rising to meet something that's just a little bit out of your reach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting how some fields you're allowed to have a coach and some fields you're not. The other day, I just watched a TED Talk with this guy, Atul Gawande, and he wrote a book called The Checklist Manifesto. And he's a surgeon and a researcher, and he does a lot of stuff on public health policy. And the talk was fascinating because he showed pictures of or a video of some basketball players, the best in the world, and they all run over to their coach for advice before they do whatever they're planning to do in the game. And they'll have constant feedback from them. And so they're the experts in their field in basketball. And yet in some fields, we assume that you're not allowed to have a coach. So surgery, for example, not many surgeons have a coach. And he was just thinking about this a little bit, like we're saying, on just outside the normal realm of thinking. And just thought, why don't I have a coach? Surely I'm not perfect right now and I could improve. And he went back and he found, I think it was one of his research professors or somebody that he'd studied with, and just said, would you come and coach me? I just want you to observe me and write some notes. And in this talk, he says that he does this surgery, and then he can see the guy who he's brought in. And by the end of the surgery, Atul thinks, yeah, that was great. Went all to plan. I imagine he hasn't got any feedback. And he just said, so I imagine you've not got anything to say, but is there any like little points? And he just turns his board around and he's written a full A4 page of scribbled improvements and feedback and all of that kind of stuff. So in any field, I think it's useful to have a coach, regardless of what you're doing, whether you call them a coach or a mentor. But it's incredibly difficult to do everything yourself and not rely on the expertise of others. So finding a mentor is definitely something beneficial, or a coach in whatever you're doing. But if people are looking to find a coach or a mentor for whatever aspect of life they're trying to improve, how would you recommend that they go about that process?
That's a really good question. The way that I've had success getting high level mentors, people like Derek or Rick Hansen, is to, first of all, understand fully their written work, their blog posts, read all their books, listen to all their podcasts, and then answer the questions that you have for them as you think they might answer them. So before you even approach them, you've sort of reached the limit of what you can do on your own, and then you have like one specific thing that you can't get on your own, and that's the question you want to ask them. And generally, so if you're reaching out to someone cold, simply telling them the meaningfulness around what they've done, like how it's impacted you, or how you've already gone through their books and you've implemented a bunch of the things that they've suggested. Like in chapter 5, you said to do this, and I tried X, Y, Z, and X and Y worked, but I couldn't get Z to work. So, if you happen to have time, what do you suggest I do? This, or this? And then they can just see that you're a person that takes action. They can feel the compliment that you're respectfully only asking them for this one little thing, and maybe you get mentorship in your first email. I like a long-term approach. I'd love to have these people as long-term mentors. So I try to figure out ways that I can help them. Generally, this is through introducing them to people that I think could be collaborators, or give them opportunities. If I want to get them on a podcast or a TV show or something like that, I try to make that happen. So I'm leading with generosity, so that they know that I'm willing to be giving and not just taking their insight and knowledge. And then eventually they may offer, like, hey, I'd be happy to jump on a call anytime you want, which is a really cool place to be. And that's you've moved from the realm of I'm simply just asking you for advice to we're kind of friends and I ask you for advice.
So you offer coaching, as you said before, for we've talked about cycling, but also personal development, podcasting, and entrepreneurs. And so when you're coaching, what specifically do you do? Like, how do you think about the coaching process when somebody approaches you?
Yeah, so these days I've moved away from cycling coaching, and I'm focusing specifically on people that are trying to create freedom in their lives through starting a business. So whether that's location freedom, living on a tropical island, or time freedom because they want to sleep in and they work best at night, or they want to go spend time with their families. That's important to me, to be able to see my son throughout the day and take breaks when I'm done recording a podcast or something like that. So the starting your own business lets you do a lot of those things, and there's a business in and of itself is pretty simple. You need a product that fits with somebody that wants to buy it, and you need to know how to sell it, and you need to know how to let them know you have the thing that you're going to sell. Like, that's pretty much all it is. But it gets so much more complex when you deal with imposter syndrome, or deciding between, should I do this or should I do that? What's the order of things that I should learn how to do? So the game really comes back to who you're being. If you feel confident that you can make money from a business, then it'll be much easier than if you don't feel confident. You might not even start, even though you have a good idea and even though you want to. So the coaching is partly strategic. You need to learn how to sell. You need to figure out how to talk about your product. But generally, it's a lot more about helping people get out of their own way so that they can do the basic steps of, picking a package that they're going to sell and setting a price and then selling it.
Yeah. So you mentioned there that you have a think about the basic stuff with the business, like, can I provide a service that people want and are going to pay for? But is there anything more specific that you do to work through an opportunity like this, that a person brings you, or a business idea that somebody brings you, to determine whether the business is going to be a good one or not? Or do you just recommend that they do some market research and bring it back to you?
Yeah, both of those things. So if you know you want to start a business, it's often helpful to simply look at all of your interests, skills, hobbies, books you read, and come up with businesses based on what you're already good at. Generally, these are service type businesses. So if you're good at Spanish, it could be translating from Spanish. If you're good at math, it could be tutoring in math, or whatever. Like, these are things that you're eminently able to provide. Then you ask yourself, is the person that, does someone actually want this? I think, yeah, somebody does want translation services. And are they willing to pay? So if you're trying to teach college students how to be better with money, well, they don't have money already, so they might want to be good with money, but they don't have enough to pay you. So it's not really a good market fit. So you can cross some ideas off your list, and eventually you're narrowing down your ideas until you find one that seems eminently doable. You can, based on what you know already, you can start this business. But then it's time to go and start having conversations if you know you want to be serving adventure cyclists, well, it's time to go and actually talk to 5, 10, 15 adventure cyclists about what they could benefit from, in terms of products that specifically help them fix something, or if they have some sort of dreams or desire, like something that can facilitate those dreams happening. Then once you've done your research and it's confirmed to you that you do have a good idea, people want what you're selling, then it's time to go out and sell it.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's people listening that just think, yeah, that sounds great. And I imagine that you probably just wouldn't work with somebody at this point. But if somebody says, I don't really have any defined skills yet right now that I think people want, but I'd like to learn some, what advice would you give to them in terms of deciding what route to go down to acquire a skill, which skill to acquire? How do you decide which one might be a good one to do?
Yeah, and this is where you want to model after someone who's already done something similar. So, for example, if I want to be a good podcaster, I'll look at famous podcasters and see what they're doing well. Their skill in getting good guests on the show, their skill at asking good questions, the skill at, not saying or ah while they're podcasting. Okay, what are all the skills that they have? And then which ones of those might be most important in terms of my overall success? And just pick one that you think is really valuable and then go get that skill.
And if somebody's looking to become a coach, they think, I'd love to do this, what advice would you give to them? And are there any resources that you found, like this is a great book or a great website or a great organization that really helped me upskill being a coach?
Well, as we were talking about, I think coaching is valuable in so many different areas. I have a business coach, I have a relationship coach, I have a life coach. So I'm getting coaching in many different realms. And the coaching industry is, multi-billion-dollar, maybe even trillion-dollar industry that's growing. So it's people are really recognizing the value. I learned to coach from, at least on the business side, from David Wood, who is a friend of mine. We met in Bali, and his business is called Solution Box. And on my podcast on the Art of Adventure, there's a couple episodes where he basically highlights the step-by-step how to become a coach if you've never thought about it. So those are episodes like 49 and 50, I think, or something like that. Have a start there,
Awesome.
look him up. But there's life coaching schools. There's all kinds of coaching schools where you can go and spend 6 months and learn how to do it.
Amazing. That sounds great. So yeah, if that's what you're planning to do, then check those episodes out and take a look online to see what sort of coaching schools might suit you. So a lot of people who listen to the show say that they are inspired by the guests that come on, and they hear these great tales of people who've sort of upended the normal life and gone to build an exciting, better, more authentic life. But the what is there, they know what they want to do, but they don't necessarily know how to do it. And the process is a very long one, and maybe getting mentors and listening to podcasts, a few that you've mentioned, is a good way to do it. But could you just give us an idea, or maybe even talk us through an exercise that people could do today to start that ball rolling?
Okay, well, here's an example that I have had to become better at. When I learned I was going to be a father, I went through one of the hardest few days because I didn't feel up to the challenge. I thought, I'm just going to totally blow it. This sucks. I'm not ready, all these things. And the main insight that came from this huge struggle was that I can ask for advice. I have, great men in my life that I can ask about parenting. And so I started asking for help. I started asking for emotional support and advice, and people gave it, and it was awesome. And I realized I don't have to do things alone. And at the same time, I was still shy about asking for things. And so I think maybe one of the biggest things that you can practice is learning how to ask. So every day I'm practicing just being a little uncomfortable and asking for things. Sometimes it's even something that I don't even care about. I'll be on a boat and I'll ask the captain, "Can I steer the boat?" Or, just something ridiculous, or, um, asking someone if you can have a tour of their garden, your neighbor, when normally you wouldn't, and just getting okay with asking people for things, because people love to be helpful, and so it's actually it's not usually imposing on them. Usually people love to be asked for help. Like if someone asks you, "Hey, can you hold the door for me?" and you do it, you actually be like, "Oh, I did it. I did my good deed for the day. I feel great about myself." So yeah, I think a practice of simply asking for things. So if you know someone that you want to learn something about, just ask them or send them an email or tweet at them or whatever. That's probably one of the most useful practices for getting started, is just taking little baby steps, asking, trying something out, and if they say no, then that's okay too. You have to be okay with people saying no sometimes.
Yeah, you have to become comfortable at being uncomfortable. And I think it stems back to a bit of a fear of rejection, and it's a natural human conditioning to not want people to say no. And so we often don't ask because we just don't work. We'd prefer to just definitely not be hurt sometimes than to just go for it. Maybe win, but maybe lose. But that really does bring so many opportunities around, and I think it's cultural training, especially for us in the Anglo cultures, to not have to rely on anyone else for anything. I know that even just on this trip, for example, we would just be cycling along, and then the English are terrible for it, never wanting to ask anyone for anything. And I try to not be quite so old school, but we'd just be cycling along, and my girlfriend would say, "Let's just ask these people if we can stay in their garden." And the first thing I would have is just, no, no, don't ask anyone for anything. But then we did. And exactly like you say, we had the very experience that you were talking about. People were delighted that they could help. They wanted to welcome you into their home. We all had a great time. They loved hosting. And if they didn't, and they just said no, and then it was fine, you just moved on and realized it really didn't matter. But if they did, then everybody had a great time and benefited from it. So just asking, obviously politely and all of that kind of stuff, but it's definitely a great way to open more doors and opportunities. A lot of people will say, he's so lucky that this always happens to him. But fortune is definitely an element to it. But also people create their own luck by talking to strangers and smiling and doing all of the things that we've sort of talked about a little bit. So challenging yourself to be more conscious about that kind of thing can be really helpful to open up opportunities.
Absolutely.
So on just one more quick one on the digital nomad thing. You mentioned that you sort of moved away to Vietnam and you were working there for a while, and that you've done this quite a lot. And it sounds to a lot of people like paradise, an amazing way to free yourself from the normal constraints of labor and working. But I think a lot of people worry about how missing out on the things that are happening at home, and also nurturing relationships with people who you've left at home. So when you're away for long periods of time, how do you think about that?
Yeah, those are definitely the things that we notice as well. If we're spending 3 months somewhere, it's a race in the first couple of weeks to build close relationships, and then as soon as you're having a welcome party, the next month you're having a goodbye party, and that's challenging. You have to get good at making friendships quickly, and many of the people won't be long-term friends, but some of them will be. And if you can keep reconnecting with your long-term friends each time you're back in your home country, which I try to do, then you keep, basically friendships are just a collection of you guys having fun together. So as long as you keep adding to that shared experience of friendship, then it's okay. But it's something that my partner Heidi probably feels more than I do. She said, I really want a house so I can grow a garden and have friends that I can just, walk to get coffee with, and we can take our kids strolling in the park. So we did get a house in St. Louis. We just bought a house last week. So
awesome. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. We'll be spending half the year at home, and then the other half traveling, to sort of test that out to see if we can be semi-nomadic.
Uh-huh. That sounds like a great way to do it, and something that we've also discussed as well. I think it's a little bit of maybe the nurturing instinct that girls tend to, not always, but tend to have that pull to want some kind of a nest and somewhere to base themselves. But
Hmm.
after being away now for even just 6 months and having another 12 to go, I can see the benefits of being able to do both. Often the goal is by having the best opportunities of both and varying it up, like being able to go away and have all this adventure and novelty and meet new people and try new food and experience new culture is wonderful. But also there's something nice about having a kind of base and a bit of stability and people that you know and a place to call your own. So if you can manage to set up both, I think that's for a lot of people like us probably the ultimate win.
Yeah, and it's I like how you frame that, and it's often just a great way to think in general. Like if I want this and I want that, maybe you don't have to pick and choose. Maybe you can just say I want it all, and how do I get it?
Mm.
Have your cake and eat it too. Like why not just have everything you want?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then let's just move on to adventure. So your podcast is The Art of Adventure, and can you just talk about how you transitioned into adventure and a couple of things that you've enjoyed doing, a couple of your adventures that you've sort of ticked off, and then maybe a bit about your favorite one that you look back at most fondly?
Well, recently in the news, there's a volcano on Bali that's been erupting pretty spectacularly. Good pictures of that
Mm.
erupting I've seen. Um, but just a couple years ago, we pretty much 2 years to the day of when it started erupting, we were on that volcano in the middle of the night, which it was the first volcano of three, and we were trying to set a world record for climbing the three largest volcanoes in Bali back to back to back in record time. And we had to climb the first one, the biggest one, in the middle of the night, so that we could climb the second one in the morning because that one was exposed, and if you did it in the middle of the day, it'd be too hot. And then the third one was in the jungle, and it started raining. And uh, at the very beginning, so the first one we had to start at midnight, and we all arrived at the base of this. Uh, I guess it's a 4,000-meter volcano, 12,000 feet, um, rising straight up from the sea. So it's a pretty big mountain. And we arrive at the bottom, and we pull into the parking lot, and there's nobody there. And we synchronize our watches, and we've got a couple of local guides, and they show up, right at midnight. We're starting to fret that we're not going to be able to climb because you have to have a locally trained guide to climb these volcanoes. And so we set off, and we're gonna try to run up, or at least speed hike up and down all of these volcanoes. And we walk around behind the Balinese temple, um, which is where the trailhead starts, climbing this volcano. And we had no idea because there was no one in the parking lot, but there was, let's say, 10,000 Balinese people behind the temple and another several thousand on the trail already. And it's just this single track trail leading all the way up to the summit of the volcano. And it was like, what are all these people doing here in the middle of the night? And they're carrying goats and chickens and 50-pound bags of rice. And there's like a bunch of priests, but there's a bunch of grandmas and little babies, and they're all hiking up this mountain. And there's no way up the mountain other than this one little trail. So we have no choice but to jump in line with them. And what we learn is that it's a secret ceremony that is meant to turn on rainy season. Like, basically, they have this huge sacred ceremony where they make sacrifices into the volcano, and then it's supposed to start rainy season. And not even our local guides knew about this, is how
Wow.
secret it was. And so we pretty much lucked into being maybe the only Westerners to ever be part of this sacred ceremony. Um, but it was definitely very slow. We thought, oh my gosh, we're way off record pace. There's no way we're going to set the record because we're stuck hiking behind grandmas and flip flops up this volcano. Um, it was a super cool experience. Like, a bunch of the priests wanted selfies with us after we got down. It took us 6 hours to go up and back. this volcano. So I do have this really cool picture selfie with these priests. Um, so we were behind schedule after that volcano, but what ended up happening was that because we had been so leisurely in our efforts on the first one, is that we were able to go faster and faster on volcano 2 and 3, so that we ended up breaking the record by 3.5 hours or so. Because
Wow.
and at the end, nobody was tired. People were like, I could climb a few more volcanoes. Um, so it was a great lesson in, how you spend your energy. If you go out really, really hard at something, you might be tired before you even get to the end. But if you start slow and you accelerate the whole time, then you can really start to go super fast over long distance. So we got an awesome experience out of it, and we broke the record, and it was more than I could have asked for on undertaking something like that.
Yeah, and an amazing blessing in disguise, I guess, when you think at first, oh no, we're never going to do it, and you're sort of forced to just take a back seat and enjoy it, but then you end up breaking the record anyway, then it's a big win all round.
Yeah, and the other lesson for me was just sometimes you just have to try things and see how they turn out, just because they seem like fun,
Hmm.
or they seem like largely setting records is just for the hell of it, um, just to see what happens.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So lucky to have just stumbled upon that. Have you got your eye on any other big adventures to come, or are you just busy with coaching and all that kind of stuff now?
I have a big adventure that is in the back of my mind. It's not fully formed yet, but the basic idea is to recreate Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist and
Ooh.
journey across the Sahara on a sacred pilgrimage. Uh, I don't know when that will happen, but it's something I've been thinking about for a little while.
That sounds great. You have to do it just because I want to watch.
Yeah.
And just before the show, we talked a little bit about the value of adventure, and it's not just about the excitement of it. There's also something a little bit more. And you mentioned during the episode about the importance of exploration and adventure in a terms of evolutionary sense, that we've always had that as Homo sapiens. But how do you think about the extra dimensions available from adventure, maybe like finding sacredness or personal growth or all that kind of stuff that also comes along with an adventure other than just it being exciting?
Yeah. Well, I think most people have this question in their minds, especially men, which is like, do I have what it takes when the chips are down? And traditionally, men were fighting in wars, trained in combat, martial arts, things like that. Um, we have less opportunity for direct combat these days, which I think that's fine. But then the question still is, am I up to the challenge, or just who am I when things get tough? And I think that's part of the drive for adventure, is just to understand who we become when we're challenged to our limits, just to discover what we're made of. Um, and that, I think, becomes the core of confidence when you strip away like what you do for a living and who your friends are and all, and your fancy car. If you've been on some adventures, if you've undertaken some big challenges, you can say, if I'm left with nothing else, here's who I am underneath. Then it's a great place to base your confidence from, and let your life flow from a knowledge of who you are.
One more final aspect that I'd love to touch on is just your photography, especially on your Instagram, is amazing. I highly recommend that people go and take a look. Derek Loudermilk at The Art of Adventure. And how did you? I remember reading a little bit, but just for the listeners, how did you learn photography? And for somebody that's sort of into it but wanting to take their photography to the next level, what advice would you give them?
Photography, I mean, essentially you're making art out of something that's already there. So it's it's like, if you were to tell someone, go be creative, well, that's super broad. But if you tell them, be creative by framing the world in your lens, then you're working within some constraints, and it's actually opens up creative possibilities. Do I want to shoot this in black and white, or do I want to focus on something small, or do a landscape? So it's just giving some framework for you to exercise your creativity. And personally, I tend to photograph things that I encounter on adventure, plants, landscapes, interesting people. Um, the in Harry Potter, there's this idea of the Horcrux, where he's like taken part of his soul and like imbued it in different objects, and I think photographs are kind of like that, where it's like you have this entire experience that you as the photographer are having, and then you take 1,000 photos and you have this one picture, which is your favorite, which serves as the holder of the memory of an entire experience. So I think that's what's cool about photography, is that it's like just a brief trigger for your imagination to recollect these experiences, or for someone that hasn't been on that experience, you can create the world or the dreams around the photograph. Um,
I remember reading that you learned a while ago, and have you seen anything that maybe could help that amateur who's looking to get a little bit better at photography, other than just practice? Have you seen any resources, or has it just been for you? You were taught a long time ago, and you've just practiced a lot.
well, I mean, I think it's mostly just I take hundreds of photos every day. Most of them I'm not using for anything. But yeah, I think this is one of those cases where a little bit of guidance, take some classes or whatever to learn how to compose, to learn how to edit, because you can do a lot with editing. Um, but simply, if you give the camera to someone who's not trained and they take a photo and you look at it and you're like, well, why doesn't this look good? And you give it to someone who's trained and they're in the same spot and they take the photo and it looks amazing. It's simply just practice in composing a nice photo, how it's going to look. So yeah, as with anything, getting feedback on your photos, copying, if you see someone with a great Instagram feed, like just copy some of their photos and try to recreate the exact photo, and you'll realize it's actually kind of challenging sometimes. So if you go to the Grand Canyon or somewhere where there's like a ton of people doing photos, and you take a photo and it doesn't look like that, well then, like, how do you actually make the photo look good, like the good ones you've seen? Can go a long way to improving your skill.
What camera would you recommend for somebody looking to get into photography that's not something super flashy or expensive, but that can produce good photos? Is there anything that you would recommend as a sort of starter kit?
Well, for a long time I was using my iPhone. Recently I've purchased the Sony Alpha 60. Let's see, it's right here on my desk. 6500. And yeah, this is a great travel camera because it's super small but really powerful. It's mirrorless, so it takes up less space because there's no mirror mechanism. Yeah, there's a few cameras. There's like a Fuji, there's a Sony that are supposed to be quite good. So that's what I use, is the Sony.
Yeah, the Sony is great. It's got a little pancake lens, and like you say, for travel, it's just amazing because it actually can fit in your pocket. So if you're looking for something like that, it's not too expensive either. So yeah, check out the Sony A6000 series. They're pretty great. So just bringing it home now, the show's called We Need More Heroes, and I always ask guests, other than your parents, who are some heroes of yours or people you look to for inspiration?
Yeah, and I think people that have made such a big impact on my life are largely people that have shown me how to think and how to be as a person. So I had a scout leader. I was in the Boy Scouts growing up, who basically told me, he was like, you can be a leader if you want, and sort of showed me how to do that. And I got to practice being a leader in different roles in the Boy Scouts. So these naturally, like coaches, scoutmasters, like these are great people to be influential. I had a biology teacher, and probably the reason that I became a biologist or a scientist is because he was so excited about animal behavior. We would go on field trips to the zoo, and we would watch monkeys or lizards, and he'd be like, wow, look at what they're doing, isn't that cool? And it was just his enthusiasm, and I was like, oh my gosh, that is super cool. And we made these, these models, these mazes for mice to run through, and we got to study it, and it was just this contagious enthusiasm. And so pretty much anytime someone is super excited about something, I'm more likely to get into it just because of their enthusiasm.
Yeah, it's amazing how powerful that is. It doesn't really matter what it is. Somebody can be super passionate about playing cards, different types, but as long as they're passionate, it sort of rubs off on you a little bit. Is there anybody else that springs to mind, or is he the main guy that you sort of think of in terms of inspiring you?
I get inspiration all the time from people that I talk to, people that are trying things, entrepreneurs, adventurers. Um, I really, when I'm out, at a cocktail party or at a business meeting, I'm actually always looking for something magical about the person I'm talking to that's going to inspire me. So pretty much I'm actively seeking to be inspired by everyone that I meet. To which end, I'm generally asking tons of questions to everyone just to find, what they super care about, like what, just like my biology teacher, and that's how I get inspired, and it happens to be multiple times a day because that's really fun to have happen multiple times a day.
Yeah, that's interesting. And what do you normally start with if you're like at a dinner party and you want to try and mine something inspiring or interesting? How would you normally open your conversation?
Well, I'm often asking people about what they are most curious about right
Hmm.
now, because if they're spending time to investigate something, there's usually a good reason or a drive behind it. So I'm asking them about what they're learning, what they're curious, or perhaps I'm asking them about how they dealt with particular challenging situations that I have never gotten to experience. So if I'm talking to a car mechanic, I'll be asking them like, what's the most difficult repair that you've done, or explain how you approach solving this problem. Essentially, I'm podcast interviewing everybody.
Yeah, treating the whole world as an opportunity to learn. I love that. That's a great way to go through life. And my final question, I think we've probably already covered it. So if you feel like there's nothing more to add, then please just go for it. But the last question that I normally ask everyone is, do you think that heroes are born or made? Is it nature or nurture?
I think if you decide to be a hero, then you'll act heroically. And I've decided that now that I'm a dad, I'm going to be a hero, and all kinds of things fall into place. It's much easier for me to be decisive. It's much easier for me to lead groups of entrepreneurs. It's much easier for me to earn a lot of money. It's much easier for me to take a stand around a strong opinion that I have simply because I've decided to be a hero. So I think, some people stumble into it, the reluctant revolutionaries or whoever, and some people actively seek being a hero. But eventually everyone sort of says like, okay, well now I'm in this position where people see me as a hero, or I'm living as a hero. So if you want to be heroic, just decide that you are, and then just live from that place.
Mm. How do you remind yourself to do that, that you're supposed to be acting this certain way? Because we all get to choose how we act and we can change the sort of character that we're playing going through life, but sometimes it gets hard or we get tired. So how do you ensure that you keep doing that?
I think I even say to myself, I'm a hero. If I'm not a hero to anyone else, I'm a hero to my kid. And it's like when I walk through a door, when I leave the house, when I sit down to write, it's in the back of my mind. Like, if I'm going to be a hero, like let's act like one. So it's not necessarily a series of actions. It's just an identity. And so I've even written down. I have here in front of me like a few affirmations that I like to tell myself. So if I'm a hero, I'm calm when things are chaotic around me. I trust myself. I'm capable, I'm confident, all these things that I just remind myself, like I have these traits, and whatever I do, whatever conversations or problems I'm trying to solve, like that'll just comes from like this sense of who I am.
That's a great idea. I think that's a really good little exercise to do, and something that I'm going to do. Just write it down on a little flashcard and carry it around with you everywhere. Take it out a little while and rehearse those affirmations. And I guess eventually, if you do it enough, then it becomes true.
Yeah, it's it's kind of fun to do over time and see what happens.
Yeah.
Fun little experiment.
And to realize that we're malleable. Amazing. Derek, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful. If people want to find out a little bit more about you, where's the best place for them to get in touch or learn a little bit more?
Yeah, thanks, George. DerekLoudermilk.com or at Derek Loudermilk on social media. And we've already mentioned the Art of Adventure podcast as a great supplement to this podcast.
Yeah, you should take a listen. It's great. It's got loads of amazing guests and very varied. So if you enjoy this, I'm sure you'll enjoy that. So Derek, thank you again for coming on the podcast. And thank you guys for listening. So now you've heard the story, it's time to get out there and be the hero in your own story. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
There we have it. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, spread the love and share it with anyone you think would also benefit from it by sharing it on Facebook or Twitter with the hashtag #WeNeedMoreHeroes. Connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at @WeNeedMoreHeroes and just more_heroes on Twitter. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and in fact any of our other episodes, so get in touch at weneedmoreheroes.co. Thanks so much for tuning in and sharing the love. And thank you again to today's sponsors, Cotswolds Outdoor, Cross Bikes, Garmin and Cumulus for making this show happen. You've heard the magic, now do something with it and be the hero in your own story.